There we go. I'm ready. Everyone tuned into my stream. Can we see good old Harrison Ford? And that definitely happened in a scene from Indiana Jones when he took the celestial sphere off the block. Everyone remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Nice. All right, here we go. So first off, let's do more of like an open roundtable. So if anyone has questions or whatever, shout them out. If you want to share your particular pronunciation of Ptolemy at any point, feel free. Right. Also, this presentation is all up on the database. It is on its own tab, and if people don't know, this is the database that's out there for all the presentations that we do. If anyone wanted to take a look, there's also this presentation completely in PDF form, ready to go. You can download. All the slide deck is there. A whole bunch of extra information. It actually required a whole bunch of different tabs. Like there's a whole tab for Ptolemy's Geographia, which you can definitely take a look at. The whole PDF is there, courtesy of Eric, with some analysis. Definitely a huge part of this presentation. It was a good read. Mixed in there some coordinate systems, some math, some right ascension declination stuff, some astrophotography, some angles to the stars. Really, like the backbone for what we're going to be going through today is on the database, and everyone should check it out. I guess we don't advertise it enough. The boys know, but for anyone new, right? It's all publicly accessible. Oh, there's that scene. I remember it. Just as I remember it. Yep. So let's start with the sun. The sun and the ecliptic. When we talk about the celestial sphere, it's really a made-up concept that we think that it's convenient for us that we put in place based on this. Based on our flat level plane and the observation of the sun making an arc, right? Rising and setting. This is all the evidence for the globe that there ever was. And today we're gonna dive into that. So first, let's take a look at what the ecliptic is for flat Earth, because Globers actually hurl the ecliptic at me as if it's an insult, right? As if it's an attack, and it's like, whoa, well, no. Obviously, that was backwards engineered off real observations, and in no way is it exclusive for your model. But let's take a look. So when we talk about the ecliptic, right, we talk about the sun's apparent migration from tropic to tropic and what it looks like to us. Now, what causes this is if you look at the flat Earth dome model here, right, you can see that the sun is on a slight tilt above the plane, right? It's not perfectly level on the slight tilt. It's about a 5-degree inclination. Now, the moon is on a similar inclination, but not the same. And the difference in those inclinations between eclipse cycles is what makes them miss most times when they intersect and not actually connect for a so-called eclipse, right? So those two things are definitely present. The one from the sun, though, is what creates what we know as the ecliptic, right? So the sun's band is what we're looking at in each observer. So from here, you can see the sun travels from about here to about here. That's the 23.5 degrees that we're talking about in the ecliptic. If we get a different angle on it, we can see the analemma being deformed in the person's perspective, right? Because each person would see in a different position here. So that's where the sun is, and that's where the sun appears to be. So the migration of the sun annually is what we're calling the ecliptic. So this band, you see this band right here, the sun travels from this band, depending on the time of the year, south of east rather, and set south of west. So it's rise south of east, set south of west. There we go. And again, depending on the season, it does the opposite. Rise north of east, set south of west. Okay, now that ecliptic band in each observer is what is making this possible. Again, right? This is the band. And this is again caused by the true path of the sun doing this. And as its migration, it goes up and down, it changes height, and it gets a little bit lower depending on the season, right? So if we looked at it from the top, you would be able to tell it just goes out and in, out and in. And that's what we see on most of our simulations, most of our depictions when we're talking about it. This is what it shows you. But what it's actually doing in 3D is changing heights, right? That's all it's doing. That's what creates more and less light. If you look at it down, you can see that as it gets lower and out to the corner, it creates more and less light. But that's the ecliptic in a nutshell. Right. And that's, again, all the evidence there ever was for the globe. And we start with the daytime celestial sphere because that's what the nighttime celestial Whoops.
But not a mutually exclusive proof of the globe then?
Dude, I forgot that I had no push to talk. Hold on, let me fix this. Voice activity. There we go. Yeah, I can't do push to talk while presenting. Somebody remind me to change this later, or I will definitely hot mic through some stuff. So all the globe evidence there ever was is the ecliptic, right? The sun. We start with the sun, the daytime celestial sphere, but it is in no way different during the night. It's just this hemisphere that you view, and the celestial objects' path make arcs as they rise and set, as they would if you observe the world in a hemisphere or a half dome, right? Over here is the corresponding position of on the globe Earth where it would have to be, right, for this to make sense. And that's crazy, of course. This is crazy. This is how it gets misinterpreted to be this, though. And from this, we get this. But everything is based on flat Earth, right? You can't have any elevation angles off an infinite tangent to a curve, whatever. But when we get into it, when we talk about the celestial sphere, we should probably try to define it. So when we define it, we should probably start with what they say it is, right? So we'll go to our good old Wikipedia. And when they say it, it's just an abstract sphere that has an arbitrarily large radius that is concentric to Earth. So they're very specifically saying, oh, it may be centered on the observer. Oh, okay. And all objects in the sky can be conceived as being projected upon the inner surface of the celestial sphere. Oh, that's interesting. It's interesting how it says that it can be thought of, right? It can be treated as, you can do calculations based on it isn't, but you can treat it in all practical world as if it is. That's interesting. Also, something about the distance here. It would seem, yeah, it needs to be in the distance. Let's go to a more accurate definition, right? We can say it's an abstract concept characterized by the arbitrarily large radius, which is, for practical purposes, infinite. It's an infinite radius. You can't have arbitrarily large. That is in no way different than infinite. So when you have an infinite radius, that's flat. You're using flat angles. It's the same thing. The celestial sphere is essentially pretending that the Earth isn't flat and that the sky is, right? So it's doing an inversion of that, but we'll get right to that. It says that, right, if you set the celestial sphere to an infinite radius, you make the sky the planar geometry and the ground spherical. But in reality, you actually measure angles to the sky, making it the sphere, and then you lay a square on the ground because of its planar aspect to reality. So it's completely inverted. But by projecting stars and celestial bodies onto this imaginary sphere, they say they can simplify it. Oh, because then they get to treat them all as if they're the same distance, which in all practical uses, for every time they used to measure them and navigate by, they're all equidistant. So a sphere of infinite radius can be conceptualized as a flat plane. And if you work it out, right, in geometry, as the sphere increases indefinitely, the curvature decreases. And eventually, if you go that to infinity, the curvature becomes zero, meaning it's flat. So practically zero difference between a sphere of infinite radius and a flat surface. Just putting that out there. And again, the celestial sphere most basically is an abstract concept. So isn't a real thing. It's a made up thing. And why do I depict it like this, right? I think maybe you guys have seen this image go around. I do depict it like this, but what is that based on? Let me turn chat off. There we go. So I do it like this because it's all coordinate systems, number lines, and nonsense. It's got no basis in reality. The celestial sphere is essentially...
Oh, there you go.
Yep, it's essentially spherical coordinates, basically, on top of spherical polar planar, when you're getting angles with geographic long lat. Of course, you got the planar cone, which is doing minor circles of equal altitude all the way down. That's the purpose of the cone. And then you can't forget the geographic long lat, which is, of course, the grid lines, giving you the spherical axis. Of course, we get to our geographic long lat with angles now. We have a point. And then this would be the celestial sphere. So that all those images are what I've been using as my celestial sphere, because I couldn't think of a better way to show it was made up of number lines and nonsense in space with no tie to reality, right? So it's all made up math. If we look at another depiction, nice flat plane with a celestial half dome on top. I think all of the depictions would agree, right? This one, they call it the local celestial sphere. If you say that to a glober, they'll scoff. That's a made up thing that Shane made up. No, absolutely not, right? First of all, the atmospheric dome put out by Jaron way back when, right? So we've all just been building on that, and it's just a concept of you have a limit of vision, which is based on you don't see forever because light attenuates and there's an inverse square law and it falls off, and all of that makes sense, right? So the local celestial sphere is just something that they use to reference everything in the sky. Another contributor, our boy Levelist, I think hooked us up with this one from the Passive Solar Energy book. They call it the Sky Dome. That's interesting. Almost like same depiction, taking angles based on a flat baseline. Another depiction, the same thing. This is what they call the celestial sphere. They're using their quadrant to take measurements. It seems to be a pattern. When they get over here, of course, this is how they get infinite parallel light. But nutation, look at their explanation for the 23.4 degree tilt. Way more complicated than the sun going up and down and in and out, I would say. And if we just let's get to a brief pictorial representation, right, of what the celestial sphere is. It's super easy. We can go through it, right? We start with you sitting out on your flat plane, viewing the stars in a hemispherical dome around you. This is how you would see them, right? This is how we observe them on both models. No matter if you live on the globe, we view them exactly the same, right? It's not a physical dome. It's just the limit of your vision. So when you can't see forever, which is, I think, evidence in the fact that nobody sees all of the sky, everyone only sees half of the sky, which is why this gives us the half of the radius over here, right? This is why I say that all the time. If we have the global perspective, they think that the street lights are setting, right? Just like the sun doesn't set. But if we use our celestial sphere to observe celestial objects, how do we do that? Oh, but then how do they move? Oh, right. They move with you. Specifically 69.07 statute miles across the lateral axis as you move either into or away from the star, right? Depends on your inclination. That's crazy. That's what the globe says is because of curvature. But we've been over that one before. We're not going to hammer on it. Let's just do a little representation of how our non-moving pole star over here migrates around this orthographical view. So this is a celestial sphere around the person. To him, this is all he sees. Is this all there is? Well, no. So this model, right, is taking what else there is all the way over here and pretending to put it beneath it. The rest of this celestial sphere is below the negative axis here, but we'll get to that in just a second. This is, of course, explaining the same movement. It's going this way. It would look a lot like this, right? An actual sun circling, and then each observer having their own altitude azimuth reading as it rises and sets for them. Another visual depiction. This is a wonderful tool we use all the time. There's a celestial sphere in the background, just showing you that every representation so far has been the same. A hemispherical dome, a flat surface, and a curved sky, right? That's how we see it. That's how we model it. That's the basis of the globe, to be honest. That's all they've ever had, is this observation with the sun and now with the stars, and the stars rising and setting in this hemispherical dome. They've used math to continue it, and now they pretend that we live on a sphere, even though they've only done calculations based on things in the sky. If we go to what it's based on and how we represent those things, right? No, hold on 1 second.
You guys know we live on a sphere of infinite radius or radii?
I've heard.
Dog was being a dick. Yeah, you. All right. We have Cartesian coordinate systems, right? It's how we're representing this in 3D space. We can do one dimension. Oh, fuck me. Hold on.
I thought it was your chair squeaking when I first heard it.
Dude, no, constant whine. Constant whine. He's went out 7 times. Hold on. Anyway, right. When we get to 3-dimensional, it's just represented as a triplet. It's going to be super easy to go through later, but two-dimensionally represent rays in orthogonal. We do this all the time. We have an ordered pair, and 1-dimensional is just 1 point. So these are just 3D number lines in space. This is how we're going to use coordinate systems to go ahead and map positions of things that we see, right? This is just another representation of what we just went over. X, Y, Z, X, Y, X, right? Super easy. And again, we would divide 3D space into a set of concentric spheres centered at the origin. This is what spherical coordinate systems are. Spherical polar, spherical radial. Like, when we see about geographic long lat, it's just an iteration of this. And of course, we have this half right here. Let's see. So we went over before. Alan went over Cartesian simultaneity, right? This is one representation of how we can do something, but it could easily be represented simultaneously without loss in all of these coordinate systems. You can have Cartesian, cylindrical. I particularly like the conversion between these two. That was part of the sky mile presentation. But it really just comes down to the same, right? When we're talking about coordinate systems and representation, these are all simultaneously equal, like relativity pretends to be, right? That's the actual relationship here.
Actual simultaneity versus
Actual.
apparent? Nice.
Yeah, apparent simultaneity fails on its face. Here we have actual Cartesian simultaneity. These are lossless transfers. They're just different representations of the same coordinate, right? When we get a little bit into it, we're only going to get into the celestial sphere. We're going to do right ascension, declination, and some basic observations. So this is handy to know because this is what it's based on. We have the radial distance, so the radial coordinate is just r, I think, usually. Polar angle or zenith angle, all inclination angle, all measured from the fixed zenith direction. So that's just the angle off the horizon. And then the azimuth angle is just from north, 0, all the way around to get a direction. So a direction, a height, and a point. That's how you do it. It represents... it gets represented by these. I think that's rho. What's the other one there? We got rho for p, theta, and what's the other p?
That's a phi.
Phi. So rho, theta, phi. Cool. The reason spherical trig works because we observe a half sphere, right? And the difference between spherical trig and hemispherical trig, or hemispherical geometry and spherical geometry, is nothing, right? It's just a fundamental plane and a negative coordinate. It's exactly. Hold on.
Did he paint over the text by accident?
It appears so.
Dog's killing me, man. Anyway, what are we doing when we're modeling it with a sphere, right? We're marking periodicity and symmetry. That's all we're doing. We're saying it comes back around after a certain time, and we're saying when we don't see it, we can mathematically represent it as a negative coordinate below the horizon. That's all we're doing. We're using the coordinate systems. We can map observed positions, and we can extrapolate them to the unseen parts of the sky. That's the reason for spherical coordinate systems, because when you don't see it, you have no way to represent it except with math. And you do that with math by just inverting. When it goes below the horizon, you give it a negative measurement, a negative horizon, or a negative measurement, and that will denote exactly the periodicity with which it will return. So when they say that the globe math works, right, this is kind of what I think they mean. It does work. It will never let you down. You will predict this with utter certainty and perpetuity. It will never be wrong. Now, does that mean that the object is beneath your feet for the time that you don't see it? Absolutely not. You'll never absolutely not. No. It just means that the time that it is not seen is based on a circumference, and that circumference can be applied equally. So when we get back to octave, it's just a way to represent a portion of a sphere. That's just relevant when we're doing down to a hemisphere down here. But if you see, the difference between these two is minimal. And the difference between these two is minimal. It just says above the XY plane, Z is greater than 0. That just means that everything is the same, except you have a negative axes for one coordinate, right? These all have negative axes, right? One goes this way for positive and negative. One goes left and right, negative, positive. And this one goes up and down, negative, positive. That's all negative coordinates mean. So again, back to the circumference value. It's all about the circumference. And the circumference, as we're going to depict later, doesn't have to be the sphere beneath your feet. It can actually be the circumference of the sun's path around the flat Earth, and they could be equidistant. And then all the explanations, all the observations that we have will follow with the same explanation. if we take a look at how longitude latitude currently works, it's based on the same spherical model that we were just looking at. It's got this R radius, this polar angle. If you look up here, the point that it's intersecting is creating the lower meridian circle that we pointed out later. This could be a cone. You can see if this was filled out orthogonally, it would be the same polar representation as we had before. Now, we're going to go into a little bit of the math of like celestial sphere, like a basic observation of, say, an alt-az horizon. Like if you went into Stellarium and you put on the azimuthal grid, it would do exactly this. You'd be able to do this.
The alt-az system, or the horizontal system, right? This would be the stereographic view of the night sky. The green line would be the local meridian. Purple is the prime vertical, spans east to west. The orange horizontal arcs between the points represents the altitude coordinate. So using just increments of 10 degrees, and the point of convergence is the zenith, right? 90 degree to the zenith, but it is unique to you, right? For example, if you're going to find Vega, you'd be like, hey, it's at 61 degrees, right? East of north means that's the azimuth measurement, right? 61 degrees. And then to find the altitude, which would be above the horizon, so it's 52 degrees. So then your altitude becomes 52 degrees. So the coordinate, right? 61 degrees, 52 degrees. If you want Regulus, right, it'll be west. Since azimuth is measured eastwards from north, we can subtract its westward angle from 360 to determine its current azimuth, right? Since it's 83 degrees, we would subtract that from 360. We would get an azimuth measurement, 277 degrees. Right, super easy. Now we got to use the altitude grid to find altitude, which is angle off the horizon, and measures it 11 degrees. So that's how your local coordinate system works. But remember, this is specific to you. Right? It's constantly changing in two axes because the stars are rotating above everyone all the time. These are not static coordinates, right? These are horizontal. These are local coordinates.
Meaning, if I called up Alan and I gave him, hey, my altitude is 21 degrees and my azimuth is 61, he wouldn't be able to see what I'm looking at. He would have a different marking for where that star is. So how do we get around that? Is they do the equatorial system where they give you a great unifier, right? Where everyone has the same bisecting great meridian and therefore a universal baseline from which to measure. And then you can make comparisons that you can share with each other. So how do they do that? Well, they straight up take the fake the fake equator from the globe, which is marked from celestial observation, right? Marked on the Earth from the stars, and then they just project that upward onto the sky infinitely, and they say that's the celestial equator. So it's a perfect mirror.
Using the equator and origin of each respective system. Now we can measure the angular position of any object in the sky relative to the equator, just like we would measure the coordinates of a location on Earth, with declination serving as the equivalent of latitude and right ascension serving as longitude.
It's the same thing. It's the same exact coordinate system, except now we can do universal coordinates. So when I say I make an observation, you can compare it to the equatorial system to do off the celestial equator, and then you can make measurements. So then what you do is convert from your local alt-az grid back to the equatorial grid, doing hour angle and all sorts of conversions, which we'll go over in just a second. This is going to be the other observation that we make, just using the other part of the alt-az grid.
If we find Regulus, right, it'll be west. Since azimuth is measured eastwards from north, we can subtract its westward angle from 360 to determine its current azimuth. The equatorial system is based on a projection of the geographic poles and equator onto the celestial sphere, right? It can be thought of a celestial equivalent of latitude and longitude. Equator-centric, meaning that its angles are measured relative to the equator. Unlike the horizontal system, it's based on your geographic location, right? Vertical angle is declination. It could just be DEC, DEC, right? Comparable to latitude. Horizontal angle would be right ascension or local hour angle, RA or local hour angle, right? So that's local longitude. So we're looking right here as a bisecting great meridian, right? So all we have here is the great switcheroo. What we're looking at is how they've created this system. Because you only ever see a hemisphere or one half of a sphere in your observable celestial sky, if you create some math based on the circumference of that sphere, and you assume the sphere is beneath your feet, the math will predict when it will come back around with perpetual accuracy, right? It will never be wrong. That math will never let you down. In other words, if you just believe that whenever you lose a celestial object due to it appearing to set, if you believe that during that time it's beneath your feet, circling and coming back around, and when it comes back around to rise the next morning or the next night, we'll be looking at the sun or stars, that it was actually beneath your feet, the math will never let you down in that belief. The math will never let you down. However, it's based on a circumference, and that is just based on the presupposition of the object going beneath your feet for the rest of its journey and coming back around in the next time that it rises. But if you make the same assumption that it's simply circling above you, and for the time that it appears to set, it starts the portion of the circle where it's invisible to you, where you can no longer see it, as it circles outward away and comes back around to you, right? As it appears to rise and set as it comes and goes, that would be a circle of equal circumference, right? If you call that a circle of, say, 24,901 statute miles around that observer, then you would create a visible hemisphere of the exact same proportions, right? And you never know the difference. So if you just believe that the object's beneath your feet, then the math will never let you down. So the celestial poles and the equator are things that don't actually exist, but are thought of as conceptual to model things out. There's a terrestrial equator on the geographic graticule, right? There's not a terrestrial equator on the Earth. There's no land sphere on the Earth, right? Anyway, when we're doing we're dividing it, right? We have the projection of the celestial sphere, which is based on the great bisecting meridian unified by the terrestrial equator. Now, what that means is without the terrestrial equator being projected as the celestial equator, the local coordinates from people at different latitudes wouldn't mesh. You wouldn't be able to tell someone based on your, azimuth and horizon angle, or, based on where you see a star, they wouldn't be able to find the same star on their local altitude, because you wouldn't have a unifying factor. You wouldn't say, based on the celestial equator, taking an angle off of that to find the same star. That's what this is showing you. This is why it's required. It's a unifying coordinate system, and it's just it's a conceptual model based on the assumption of filling out the bottom half of the observed hemisphere, right? So we'll just go forward a little bit here. The celestial equator is just a projection of the terrestrial geographic equator, right? You need a bisecting great meridian to create a spherical coordinate system, and that's exactly what this does. It's the north celestial pole and the south celestial pole. Creates points at opposite ends of the theoretical sphere, right? They never change. These are static. It's a static coordinate system compared to where we're going, right? Yeah, so it creates the zenith and the nadir, the North Pole and the South Pole, right? This is a conceptual antithesis to this. It's all that is, because you have what's in the red down here is effectively never seen by anyone, created entirely by math, and you can use this to predict the path of objects when you don't see them. That's the only purpose of this. No one's ever seen it. It's not real. When we just one more, and then we're going to break for questions real quick. It's going to be on specifically the circumference, right? And how we can apply. I know I've been saying it a bunch, and I said it a bunch at the start, but I kind of want to hammer it home, and this is a good visual, I think, to show. So what do I mean when I say the circumference of the circle is the same in either case? Well, if we take a look at our flat Earth dome model here, and we take a look at, say, this hemisphere representing what any observer sees at any given point, and we pretend that, say, we continue this and we make a sphere, and we call this, the local celestial sphere, and we give this a circumference, and then we say we compare it to this larger tract that the sun makes around the whole flat Earth, say that this also has a circumference, and say that it's the equal circumference of this. This is the time it takes the sun to go around here. This is the same time it takes the sun to go across, set, come back down, come around, and set again, right? So if we did it like this, so it rises, it sets. Now it doesn't, if you pretend that it's below you, it goes circle back around, circle back around, and it comes back up again, just like that. Right? So I'm saying that the circumference of this is equal to the circumference of this. That is all that I'm saying. That's what the celestial sphere is based on. It's based on math, predicting the path of a pretend object with math that doesn't exist, that isn't beneath your feet, but it's using the math of the continuation of what you do see, which is this arc, this half sphere. And if you just use the math to continue it, you will accurately depict, describe, and predict this path exactly.
Right. So that's a lot. What do you guys think so far? Any questions?
Rushing. Great.
A good visual too, bro.
I tried to make it a couple different ways, try to talk about it a couple different ways. Because this, like, when I realized this, I was like, oh man, that's how they got the globe. And I want to try and convey that to people, how it's just like, if you understand this part, then nothing about maps is scary or intimidating for flat Earth. There's nothing about sky observation is scary or intimidating. In fact, we own those things, right? Because when you relate to the stars, right, we can do that too. But then you just know that you're not actually measuring the shape of the Earth. You're calculating everything based on the sky, which is, I think, my whole position.
I mean, when they're invoking the infinite radius, right, they're just, it's very obvious. Well, one of these things has to be a plane, they're attributing it to the sky, but then they take all their measurements from the ground as a plane. They even call the ground, that bisecting meridian, they call it the fundamental plane. So,
isn't that tricky?
It's very, it's quite a switcheroo. Can't believe I haven't seen Indiana Jones before. I'm going to have to watch it after this.
Yeah,
I had no idea that he stole the globe coordinates and swapped them out. That's crazy.
It happens just like that in the movie, I swear.
Indiana Jones and the Stolen Globe.
Couldn't figure out if you should steal the celestial sphere and leave the globe, or steal the globe and leave the celestial sphere. And then I remembered, doesn't matter, right? Because they're equal. So
Nice.
So good.
So now we're rocking back into our little detailed explanation of our octant, which is just a sphere divided by three mutually perpendicular planes into 8 equal parts, right, from an octave. Each one is a spherical triangle. Yeah. But essentially, we're just looking at how you can break up a sphere into proportionate ratios of pi and do the same thing for a half sphere or hemisphere. Again, the coordinates are identical. The only distinction, as Alan just pointed out, is a fundamental plane giving positive and negative z coordinates, so the z-axis. That is the only difference. That's why we can use spherical geometry without any fear, because of course the sky looks like this to us. Every flat Earth dome model meme looks like this, right? We own this, right? So if this is all that makes the spherical trig work, and then the rest of it is just inverting this top half with observed math, I'm down with that, right? The fundamental plane, as our boy Astronomy Live likes to point out, he thinks that it's like, oh, you have to relate it back to the fundamental plane, which requires the Earth to be a sphere. And it's like, false. It uses spherical coordinate systems with the requirement for things that aren't observed to be negative below the fundamental plane or the horizon, right? So, also not scary. Fundamental plane is something that we own. Applied specifically to eclipses, you have Besselian elements that you have to work into, which that predicts the shadow, and then you pretty much pretend there's another fundamental plane between both celestial objects and you, and you draw a completely observer-centric position. But that's a different presentation. I think we have another quick representation of spherical, hemispherical, and below the horizon. Real quick.
We're going to talk a little bit about spherical coordinates here. So this is a GeoGebra model showing what it's like with spherical coordinates, with a fundamental plane driven through the middle. So this is what I wanted to concentrate on. If you notice, it's built of straight up number lines, right? Number lines in space, positive, negative, one way, right? And now we added a third dimension to go up and down and gives us 3D Cartesian coordinates, which when placed on a sphere gives you the spherical coordinates. Now, this point A is just kind of bobbing around, but it's going positive and negative because when it passes this fundamental plane, or when it goes below the horizon, technically, right? Or when it sets and it's no longer visible to you, the continuation of the bottom half of the circumference can be said to be equal to another circle with the circumference, say, extending out this way. It would be exactly the same. The timing would be the same. The math would be the same. But the point of this is the fundamental plane is the point from which it determines positive and negative. All this is doing is determining an axis of, see this This axis right here now has positive and negative values. So when they go below, they're negative. When they go above, they're positive. Negative values is how you calculate things that you no longer see, right? And because the circumference is the same in this sphere as it is extending out this way, the math will never let you down, right? If you use this spherical math to predict when you will see an object next, depending on when you see it set, it will take the same amount of time to circle back around to rise again as it would as if it was traveling beneath your feet, because the path it's traveling is based on this circumference. And whether it's extending outward or below your feet, the circumference is the same. And again, drilling it home, we have our spherical model, we have our hemispherical model. They are virtually identical, except above and below the fundamental plane. That is it. Again, azimuth angle is the same. Everything is the same, except Z can go negative. Now, why do we go into all of that so much? Well, we're going to be talking a lot about longitude and latitude, and we're going to be talking about how they constructed coordinate systems based on angles to the stars. So we've already hit this 100 times, but we only see in half a sphere at any given point. And that when you don't see an object, we assume it's beneath our feet, predicting it with math that's, of a spherical nature. We've been over that a bunch. But essentially, what it really does, right, is inscribe these lines, and then the lines rotate with the celestial sphere and do not depend on the observer's location. That was the equatorial point we went over before. The local alt-as is one thing when your horizon can be your bisecting great meridian, but to make observations and tell people, you need a unifying great meridian, which is that projected terrestrial or celestial equator, right? So that's why we need that. That's why it's important. And if we go into our longitude latitude section, just know here's essentially my position on it, right? It was reverse engineered from observations of the sky, particularly Polaris. Latitude is synonymous with Polaris's elevation angle in the northern hemisphere. I say this all the time. Has nothing to do with the actual physical shape of the Earth. You're calculating things on the Earth based on the position of things in the sky. The spherical Earth was imposed on flat plane measurements through correction angles, meaning geodesic surveying, which we're going to go into a little bit at the end, because we need to know how planar surveying is one thing, but how geodesic surveying takes the planar measurements and then makes all sorts of corrections to the same long lat system based on angles to the stars. So they go to measure the Earth, they look directly up, they correct their Earth measurements, and then they get a sphere at the end. And essentially what we're saying is the curvature of the Earth is a on-paper illusion created by astronomic and geodetic measurements, artificially aligned. We're going to get into that a lot too. Astrogeodetics, where they combine measurements of the stars into measurements of the ground. Now, why would they do that? Well, for cosmography, of course, so they can have positions and make observations. So again, back to our angles based on angles to the stars. Looks like an upside down bowl, right? But we think of them as lying on the surface of a sphere. We saw that in the definition. They actually have to pretend that they're on the inner surface of a sphere because they're all equidistant. And again, we went over this as imaginary lines, right? If we go to our latitude definition, the old ancient definition just meant breadth or width, right? Latitudo, before we got it into globulary definitions and we started to mean, actually, it could only mean from a sphere, which is where we're at with it now. That's what it used to mean, and that's what all these people would say that it meant, right? And then you go into longitude, it meant length or duration. Longitudo, right? So this, and now it's east-west positions, essentially. The length of the known world or breadth looks a lot like this, as we went over in the very beginning. Here's what we see. Here's what we create with it. Here's what we see. Here's what we create, right? Here's what we see. Here's what we create. Now, my argument is that it's much simpler than they're making it, right? This is what everyone is based on, and then everyone is calculating based off this, right? We have celestial meridians, spherical coordinates, but this is all anyone in the history of the world has ever observed. Everything else is assumed. Now, back to what it means now when they super globed it up. It's actually a geographic coordinate that specifies the north-south on Earth's surface. Surprised it didn't say curve there. It says it measured in degrees from 0 to 90 from the poles, right? And then the equator is at 0 latitude, dividing Earth into equal northern and southern hemispheres, the bisecting great meridian at 0 degrees. And then down here, each degree covers approximately 111 kilometers on Earth's surface. Well, that is a inflected linear relationship, 69 miles per degree, as we went over before, but that would necessitate a curve for them, right? Because that makes that's their linear relationship that isn't linear. And that's how they get things like geodetic latitude. So not only do they get to redefine the word, they get to redefine it in globular flavors, but they have to stick to the geocentric part anyway, right? The angle between the radius from Earth's center to a point on the surface of the equatorial plane. All these spherical coordinate systems can't get by without them planes in the middle, right? What is your spherical coordinate system without a bisecting great meridian? It ain't nothing. You don't have one. So again, now the globular longitude definition, right? They mean specifically ties it to the globe. They try all sorts of ways. They say it's measured in degrees and east to west from the prime meridian at 0 degrees. Call meridians. They run north to south, right? And they converge at the poles. Oh, longitude proves the globe. How many times have we heard that? Because it converges. Well, do they converge? Does a longitude line exist? Do you know where it is? Or are they all calculations based on angles to the stars? Let's go back to our definition and let's see what they're used for today, right? Like if we have a map, then it's projecting a coordinate system of longitude and latitude. We say that all the time. It's not the coordinates are not a map projection. Longitude, lat aren't a map projection. They are themselves the infrastructure for which you can create other projections. You can't project a map that doesn't have longitude and latitude in it. And when you put them together, what do you get? The graticule, our good old graticule, our gridded network of longitude, latitude. Now, of course, because of its nature, it requires a bisecting great meridian, meaning it is, in fact, spherical. Can there be a non-spherical graticule? Don't know. Never seen one. If we look at what we were talking about before with our basic distances, we have our nautical mile comparison because distances like nautical miles and even haversine are based on angles to the stars, so they remain consistent. Doesn't matter if Earth is actually a sphere or a plane. Distances based on things calculated to the sky remain the same regardless. That's why they use them all the time. And that's why they did the convention back in the 1800s of converting statute miles to nautical miles. So we don't see that as finding the equivalent nautical mile. No, what they did was find whatever statute mile equaled nautical miles so that everything is based on nautical miles so that everything becomes a ratio of a terrestrial baby meridian. But we've been over that a couple times as well. Before longitude, how did they measure anything, right? Like the whole story of longitude and the board of longitude in 1712. Like how did people get by without it? And then, oh, you didn't need it at all because it was equinox. You could just make an observation of where the sun was and then knew where their solar noon was and then use that to mark noon. And then everyone could base it off of that. That's crazy. That's crazy that nobody needed longitude. So then why would they have invented it? Right? It's a natural method to determine longitude with a line with a specific meridian. Or you can see where the solar noon is, right? So during an equinox, which twice a year, the plane of Earth's equator, let's give them that, passes through the center of the sun, or the ecliptic lines up on equinox, right? Results in the sun being directly above the equator, and then the equal light out for everyone, and then you have determining longitude for solar noon over here. So sun crosses the local meridian right there at the highest point, and then that point, if you get the exact time of solar noon, then you can compare and see exactly where everyone is. But that's a crazy way to do it involving longitude, right? If we go to why we went over all of our longitude measurements here, because longitude and latitude are what is present in every map projection. So do all maps project the globe? Currently have an open debate topic on this exact thing. If you think so, please debate me. I would love to go over this. We're not going to go over it a lot right here, but the answer is, does every map project the globe? No. Now, every map projects coordinate systems. The most commonly projected is the geographic coordinate system, lat long. Every single map that you've seen, probably, that's of a world nature, is projecting these coordinates. So all maps are projecting the coordinate systems. No maps are projecting the globes. What are projected coordinate systems? Well, present on Earth using Cartesian coordinates, choice of a geodetic datum. Well, when you have coordinate systems that are tied to nothing, it needs a datum to be tied to reality, right? Any good surveyor will tell you that, and they take basic datums based on their measurements, right? But for us, datum is a geodesic datum, which means you can't have a spherical coordinate system that isn't tied to Earth measurements that conforms to this shape. Most commonly, WGS 84, NAD 83, NAD 27, these are all spherical geodesic datums. They're so spherical
that they compare their oblateness and flatness all the time. Right? They have spatial referencing system. These are all different enforced spherical geodesic datums. Now, you might say, well, no, they have planar surveying and then they have geodesic surveying, and geodesic surveying measures the curve. And you couldn't be further from the truth. We're going to watch a brief little interlude, I think, where Kenbo makes an appearance in here, and we're going to start us off with a 2-minute blurb on why that actually doesn't support this at all.
The equatorial system can be thought of as the celestial equivalent. The equatorial system can be thought of as...
All right, my video didn't pull up. That's cool.
Is he holding the WGS 84?
You like that? He's holding the geoid.
That's awesome.
Man.
He's holding the gravitational potential correction model. Very nice.
Well, the punchline is they correct a bunch. I went through all of the arc of the parallel with all the pages, and every time they make a measurement, they correct to a celestial alignment, and they look at a latitude, they have a correction table, they make an amendment. If it's not 8 inches per mile squared or below, they throw it out. They choose a different geodesic model all the way through. The point is they do absolutely no measurement. They comport spherical coordinates left and right all the time. So when we get to the astrogeodesic point, literally combining astronomic and geodetic coordinates. Think about that for a second. Astronomic, right, celestial, geodetic, terrestrial, on Earth, combining, meaning if there's a point that equals a point, but it doesn't quite match, we're going to make a match by taking a measurement. We're going to deflect this vertical over here. We're going to see how much it doesn't match. We're going to write that down. Don't worry about what we do with it. We won't tell you if that'll be for other people. But we're going to take special note of how off the astronomic measurement is to the geodetic. That's a peculiar thing for me when I was looking into surveying to figure out why they were doing that, until I realized what the purpose of astrogeodesic was. And if you look back on Twitter, this was one of the first questions I pulled out to people who were like, we're on a flat Earth map. Was like, oh, cool, what's astrogeodesics and what's it pertain to mapping? And they were like, you made that up. That's not a real thing. Who cares? You don't know either, right? All those things. But it turns out it's the combination of the astronomic and the geodetic. And when you just say those words without understanding, as some Globers literally did, like, it's this, like read the definition. It's like, okay, how does that apply to maps? Not at all, right? They have no idea. So they're combining the longitude and latitude with the celestial. That's the purpose here. But we have our good old boy Amish to thank for putting me onto this paper, which is a clip from the first astronomic deflection of the vertical. And they had to say that they had this great idea where they couldn't find the measurement, and they looked up at the stars to align, and then they made an adjustment, and they got the correct measurement. What a story. And they started doing that ever since. And that's the story of essentially deflection of the vertical and how it came to be. So, again, a couple more depictions. An astrogeodetic datum, right? An orientation, meaning that the geoid and the ellipsoid, that's the terrestrial, are oriented so that the sum of the squares of the several deflections throughout the geodetic network are made as small as possible, meaning they're taking multiple points of the station and they're trying to make these as small as possible, meaning they're trying to align them as closely as they can to the celestial alignment, right? If it's off, they correct. That's how they get this. Back to real quick on the vertical deflection. Right, an astrogeodetic deflection is specific in how far the gravity direction at any point is rotated by the local mass anomalies, such as nearby mountains. Boy, what a mouthful that is. An astrogeodetic deflection, this is when the plumb bob, right, gets pulled by a mountain that's near your measuring. You have a total station or a theodolite, and you have a plumb bob, and your plumb bob is not level, and your reason that it's not level is because you're near a mountain, and that mountain has mass, and that mass is pulling on your little old plumb bob enough to make it not level. That's the actual definition of this. This is crazy. That's a made up, guys, this is made up nonsense to hide the fact that their planar measurements, when trying to comport with spherical coordinate systems, don't match, and corrections are needed. They say it's because of the local mountain. I say it's because your retarded spherical coordinate system. Prove me wrong, right? They hit it a lot under that. The gravipotential equipotential difference all over the Earth is something they hide all over, right? It's big in Australia. They blame lots of stuff on it. It's directly responsible for that shape of the geoid, as Alan was pointing out, right? This is all the difference in the in the geopotential. That's why it's so lumpy and not spherical and not perfect, because of all that tricky geopotential differential, guys. That's what's happening. We go back to what an astrogeodetic is. Again, I think we're nailing this home. It's from the vertical deflection. So that, so far to say, is summarizing surveying, how the geodetic surveying comes into, how the geodetic datums tie into coordinate systems, all to say maps are projections of a spherical coordinate system based on angles to the stars that have nothing to do with the shape of the Earth. And in fact, when you try to involve the shape of the Earth, they severely correct back to the stars as hard and fast as they can. Any questions on that before we go to the astrolabe?
No questions on that, but to provide a supplement to your argument about the corrections being false, there's no latitude-dependent GPS corrections to account for any of these gravitational offsets that are tugging on the plug bob and making it go in different directions, that as claimed by astrogeodetic surveying.
Isn't that crazy that it's so strong that it pulls that plug bob, but it leaves the satellites alone?
Dude, it leaves the signal that's being sent alone. It doesn't cause any shift in it, which is it would have to if it's physically strong enough to deviate your plug bob. Then it's going to affect light.
If it exists, you mean? If it exists on the Earth, it
right.
has to exist.
Right.
Crazy. So now we got a couple tools. We're going to go into the ancient cosmographers and how they had known what we just went over, without a doubt, and how they knew the combination of the celestial and the terrestrial was key. In fact, when we get to Ptolemy, he'll be making it clear that if you don't believe those things, you shouldn't read his book. But the astrolabe, real quick, right? Who invented it? Who knows? Nobody knows, right? Even Wikipedia doesn't know. There's no single agreed upon inventor. It just was a thing that everybody had that people knew how to make, which when you understand what it does and how it does it is insane. That's an insane thing that everybody just had these. So one source claimed BC. I don't believe in these dates, so this is all kind of crazy. I'm a little skeptical of the Roman Empire at the current moment, so we're not even going to go to that. But by the 6th century, they're in the Middle East and North Africa, so they're all over the world. But what do they look like? What do they do? Well, we found a paper. We read it. They project the celestial sphere onto the plane using stereographic projection and operate under... Anyone want to guess what this is right here?
Is that a fundamental plane?
Oh man, it's a fundamental plane. We're gonna get some negative coordinates. So the astrolabe works on the basis of the fundamental plane. It projects the nadir or the opposite of your zenith as well. So how would it do that? Well, it literally has the South Pole. So the natives knew the Earth was flat and knew that you had a conceptual South Pole, and they knew how to treat it with spherical trig with a stereographic projection. So kind of crazy, and not direct spherical trig. It was more ratios. We'll definitely get into that, but this right here is just a different projection of this, right? This is the top, and this is what it looks like. If we get into it, the local sky, right? And then this is going to be this angle. And this is what's going to be represented on your astrolabe. So the horizon is this, cut off right about here, right? Because you only see about here. Gets a little bit interesting, right? So it represents the sphere surrounding the Earth, and the horizontal plane is the blue ellipse right over here, indicates the observer's horizon, of course. The vertical line would be the zenith, and then we have the nadir, which would be over here. And then each point is projected onto the flat surface, right? If you go on the other side, it's the same thing, but it's a top-down view. So this is exactly what we're looking at in this diagram, except we're orthographically doing our God mode view. We're shifting our perspective to up here, and then we're going to look down. All right, so again, blue is the horizon. Then we have the inner circles green. Now our lines of altitude, which we didn't go over, but if we see here, are lines of corresponding to latitude lines, essentially, which definitely corresponds to altitude, which gets translated to this when you're looking at an astrolabe, and that's what we'll be familiar with. So when we have the left, we have the projection of the local sky, which we just went over, the horizon, right? The nadir, the zenith, the horizon. Over here is a projection of the celestial sphere, independent of this, but rotating on the North Pole. They have a little peg that they put in over here. It connects on the North Pole and rotates independently around. So you have your local sky marked by the horizon, and then you have the moving celestial sphere. Interesting. Super cool. I really wish I had one. I wish someone would have given it to me, right?
I can give you some plans to make one.
Really?
Yeah, for sure. I actually 3D printed half of mine.
Oh, nice. How about you print one and then mail it to me? Is it on the table?
It's possible, I suppose. Yeah.
I feel like a 3D printer is a lot of work, but to know someone that has,
I should take a picture of the one I have right here. It's part cardstock and part 3D print. I'll take a shot while you're busy.
nice. I didn't think that you could actually make it out of cardstock. All the ones that I looked at were like ancient and ornate and meticulous and metal and crazy, but that's not necessary at all. It's just, yeah, it could be cardstock.
Yeah, they do love their brass.
Right, so here's a nice breakdown of all the major components and a nice little explanation, right? The throne, they call this, was where the peg where you hang it, essentially. The midair, the main body, the piece which all other things are attached to. The limb is the outer edge, which has stuff on it, usually climates, zodiacs, marks, hours, numerals, something like that. You have the reap, the rotating component, which we just referred to as the celestial sphere point. You have the rule, which is a straight bar that goes across, which you use in tandem with the sighting device, which is the, God, I mispronounced this later, but Alidade maybe, Alidad. So over here, essentially you turn this orthographically and you line up on this, looking through this. And that's how you make your measurements. It's a one and all tool. One of the coolest things I've ever seen for sure. Another breakdown over here. This is the dials and readings, right? So you have the celestial poles over here. You have the tropics being projected, Tropic of Cancer, Tropic of Capricorn, right? Because this is based on your horizon. They have this twilight line, your actual horizon, what would be the North Pole anywhere in the Northern Hemisphere, and then around the time markings that we went over. We're going to go through a real quick video on how to use some of these things later, so we'll just brush up real quick. I think we're already at an hour, but we're almost done, I think. So this is just an example of how to use this, an actual, what I was talking about before, to make a measurement, right? So he overlays the celestial sphere part, and you're looking at, your zenith, the twilight line, what we just went over, and then you use this movable part with the ruler to make a sight, and then it lines up on where it would be in your local alt-az. Essentially, right, what this is doing is it has the equatorial grid, and then it has the local alt-az grid. It has your local horizon where you can make measurements, and then it has the universally applicable rotating part that represents where you can make measurements to tell other people, right? It's a really ingenious way to do it when we just had to go through Stellarium and figure out how they did that. It's got all sorts of scales. There's a video that I don't think we're gonna watch, but there's like 1,000 uses for these. I couldn't figure out 4 or 5 of them. I was trying to focus on these. There's many more uses. I think you can do surveying with it. You can make site measurements with it. You can do definitely anything to do with the sextant or a quadrant or anything like that. This one particularly has the 12 zodiacs, which has a particular name that I forget at this point that I thought was interesting because it aligns with the 12 winds of Hildegard and the ether wind model, I think. But we'll go into that later. It has an unequal scale for hours, which is very interesting. Essentially for converting time based on other people's solar noon, which is what it would have been in ancient time, right? On equinox. They were aware somehow and knew that they were taking their quote longitude measurements using that. Oh, go back to this one. So again, just the scales some more. We have it's a close up of this. This is the zodiac wheel. We can see it over here. They set the Adelaide at 52 degrees, which means that they moved it all the way around and they made an observation and they aligned it. And then they're going to follow the pointers over here to where it would show them. And so again, all putting it all together on equal hour scale, the local alt-az grid all overlaid with the celestial sphere, making an observation, rotating it around to align to the observation to get your readings for where it will be. That's essentially most of the astrolabe. And then we have a GeoGebra model and a quick video, I think, going through it. And just putting all the steps together here, if we just rotate around, we have stars, right? Stars would appear on our outer disk as we rotate according to the local apparent solar time. Right? This is what it's meant to show you. This is what it's meant to model. So what do these horizon circles mean? What are they mimicking? Well, you pretend there's a South Pole below you. Then you have these latitude lines extending upward. Now you have one from your North Pole extending downward as well. Right? It's the North Pole's
Is there
over
audio
here.
for this, Shane?
Here's that.
Yeah, is it not playing?
So if you stare,
Yeah, it's not playing.
Oh, I'm hearing it.
I hear it.
Oh, Shoot. Okay. Well, give me 1 sec.
And just putting all crap, I reset it. Everyone suffers because of Alan. Also, I don't have any way to control this video when it's playing, so I can either start it or stop it or restart it completely. No in between. Isn't that crazy?
Try and start it real quick.
All the steps together here. If we just rotate
Yeah,
around,
nothing
we
for me. Go ahead and keep playing it. Sorry about that.
have stars, right? Stars would appear on our outer disk as we rotate according to the local apparent solar time. Right? This is what it's meant to show you. This is what it's meant to model. So what do these horizon circles mean? What are they mimicking? Well, you pretend there's a south pole below you, then you have these latitude lines extending out upward. Now you have one from your north pole extending downward as well. Right? It's the north pole's over here. Here's that. So if you stereographically project them, they look like this. Now this mimics exactly what you would see on your astrolabe. So if we go back, these circles are what it's mimicking, right? So when we get over here to the stereographic projection of the center of these azimuthal circles. So these are azimuthal circles from both points of the celestial sphere being stereographically projected onto this. And this is how you get the astrolabe with your horizon, east to west, the north and south poles, and the stereographic projection of the sky on a flat disk.
Pretty good. Pretty good. I got one more for the astrolabe on practical, and then we're moving on. Armillary sphere.
So inserted into the manta is the tympan, or the latitude plate, which carries the projection of the observer's coordinates with the main vertical circles and the main latitude parallels, right? Imagine on a flat plane with a hemisphere around you is the only way you can envision their interpretation of the celestial sphere. As far as the sun goes, the retina shows the sun's annual path and the position of some of the bright stars. With the alidad on the back, or a straight rule, it has sights, and you use this straight back. You aim at a star and you measure its altitude, literally functioning as a sextant. The retina is then rotated so the star indicator overlaps the latitude parallels, which corresponds to the measurement as if it was a 24-hour clock. Right? So the time of the night is given by the angle between the position of the sun on the observation day, which you record with a marker in a fixed direction. Right? If instead the day or the hour is known, you can predict the star's altitude. This is going to come in handy later when we try to compare the celestial sphere to the geographic graticule. So for any day, right, you can determine the time of the heavenly bodies rising, illuminate, and setting. Right? Now, other than that, it has 1,000 uses, and here's some of the other ones. It's the projection of the sky for a specific latitude. This one particularly is for Istanbul. If you look at the back, it's the horizon line right here on the base plate, surrounded by precise altitude circles, which can vary, marking the sun's height above the horizon, and the meridian showing the midday and midnight. Right, so right ascension declination. On the top of the base plate is a movable plate showing stars and constellation, and then a ring, which is the movement of the sun throughout the year. Right, it's labeled with dates-ish. So he's trying to say once you read it for 54 degrees above the horizon, then you turn the astrolabe to find the 54-degree circle on the back, right? Then you find it and you mark the date around the outside of the circle, which is etched on the ring that represents the sun's path. And then you rotate the plate until the date aligns with the mark. And then if you take a piece of string from the center of the astrolabe through the aligned points, you can read the time from the rim. So the line functions like a hand of a clock. And right now it's 4 minutes past 2 in the afternoon, right? So that's how that works for that function. Super cool, super interesting.
Boom, astrolabe. So all the ancients knew of the celestial sphere, knew how to project it, knew how to represent it on a flat device. And all of that got perverted and converted, and now people Well, that's just because Earth is a globe, right? No, it's based on the celestial sphere. It always has been. You can even go to the armillary sphere, which is another one we're going to cover. It's essentially the same thing as an astrolabe, but it does it in 3D. Right, so someone took the idea. Now I'm not sure if the accuracy of where this came from is true. What I do know is a lot of these are in like famous paintings and movies. They shove them everywhere for some reason. Like everyone who is everyone had a cool armillary sphere on the desk. It's a weird thing that I saw. Anyway, I'm not sure why that is, or if it's real, or if it's part of the Tartaria thing, but there's an awful lot of them around. So they're mechanical, right? They got rings and circles that represent the celestial bodies, specifically built for a location, just like in the astrolabe. They are depicted in many historical paintings and artworks and held by kings and queens. Weird, right? It's not like a scepter, but always in the background. You should look into it. Someone tell me about it, because I don't know what to make of that. So it's superior to other technology, but I would say equivalent to an astrolabe. So essentially they look like this. This is the super cool one, right? This one just has, if you recognize the same band, this is, the zodiac band that has this basic structure, and then it only has, I think, one reed over here, but it's got half of a thing. I'm not sure why they would need this over an astrolabe. I think it's just because it has a spherical globe in the middle. Another good one looks like this. If you think about it, it's probably how they built the solar system, right? Because they kind of used this one to model it, and they just kind of put armillary spheres together. But then they made it gay because this is, cheating against the three-body problem where everyone's on its own track. But if we look at how it actually works, kind of like this. Models the celestial. Everyone's on its own little sphere, and it rotates around, and you can move it independently. That's all it does. Essentially, the astrolabe in 3D. But again, all based on the celestial sphere. This one is ahead of its time in its astrogeodesics, because it already made the Earth the celestial sphere. The terrestrial sphere has been manufactured from the outer sphere. And to sort of tie it all home, we'll go back to the start. If everyone was like the start of geography, the start of how we know it's a globe, the Greeks always knew it was a globe. We're going to touch on a couple of fake Greeks and the father of fake Greeks, but just know that Ptolemy was one of the fake Greeks who was big on putting in place all the infrastructure for sphericity way back in history before it was needed, as a good old grand guy. We're also going to mention Eratosthenes and I think someone else, I forget. But we're going to go into his book a little bit, and thanks, Eric, for providing it to me. It was better than I ever could have hoped for. Everyone should read it. It is a good read. Here's an intro panel, and here's the same text over here represented. I'm just going to read it out. It's the only book on cartography to survive from the classical period, and simultaneously is one of the most influential scientific works of all time. What do you guys think of that first statement right there? That's the only book that we have, and it's the most influential one.
Okay, so this is the primary source for the mainstream narrative moving forward. Got
essentially, yes. And it's like the basis for other fake Greeks to even cite. So other fake Greeks cite this fake Greek. I mean, this real Greek so far. I didn't say it was fake yet. So literally, it's like the reference on how to gather data and draw maps. When we get into this, you guys aren't going to believe this shit, but Ptolemy championed the use of astronomical observation. Wait, what do you mean? He was the first one to look at the stars to measure the Earth. No way. The father of globularity. And then applied mathematics in determining geographical locations. Wait a second. Did he just invent astrogeodetics? Hold on. Gathered data to draw maps, to champion the use of astronomical observation and applied mathematics in determining geographical locations. Yes. Yep, that's what that is. Okay, so they attributed astrogeodetics to him. He invented it right here, and it's the first page. Haven't even done anything. So, more important, introduced the practice of writing longitude and latitude for every feature drawn on a map so that someone else, possessing his wonderful text and father of everything, could reproduce Ptolemy's map at any time. What? Hold on a second. Ptolemy was in the ancient times writing about, this is ancient Greece with their fake long lat, and then longitude, as we know, wasn't invented until 1714 with the Board of Longitude and back 1702. So what is this guy doing with the birth of time and the father of history, writing everything in geographic long lat? WTF, bro. That can't be real.
Nope, 100% real. We're going to look right at it. But so into the preface of the geography book, right? Just know that if you want to read it, actually no complete copy exists. It's definitely real, but no one has the complete text. We have good translation of parts of it. That's cool, right? It does have an enormous list of names that other people seem to have cited, and that's cool. But it involved long lat. So I wonder how he did that. I wonder how that worked. I wonder what challenges that posed. I wonder how that's going to connect to what we're talking about. I wonder why it's so abstract, first of all. This is the basis of cartography. The book is called Geographia, right? The basis of geography. Take note, it's not called cosmographia, right? Because they want to make you know that actually the astronomical measurements aren't involved at all, except the guy was the father of inventing those same astronomical observations and putting them into his model to behold the terrestrial and celestial spheres, right? He puts it right in his book, actually, that you must believe that they are the terrestrial and the celestial spheres to make sense of his book. So what does he have in here? It is, again, a treatise on cartography, the only book on the subject to have survived. It has topography, some maps, extensive than any other, succinct rules of astronomy and other forms of data gathering. He himself says that he actually didn't do it. He had nothing to do with it. He stole most of it from this guy called Marinus of Tyre, right? So he cites this other guy who may or may not be real, or who may or may not himself cite other fake Greeks. Who knows? I didn't go much further than that. But just know that Ptolemy, the father of all this, is actually saying that mostly he stole it from this guy, and no one knows if he's real or not. Anyway, we're going to go back to our boy Hipparchus, all right, who also invented all the things that we needed for longitude, and it had like 17 Nobel Prizes, but all of his work got burned, trust us, bro, or something like that. But he had also reliable astronomical data for a handful of places. So what they're saying here is the only thing that limited their geographical prowess on the terrestrial sphere was their knowledge of the celestial sphere, because they didn't have all these astronomical observations. They said they were limited by their lack of astronomical data. Oh, man. Therefore, you couldn't make a map. You couldn't make a map of the ground because they didn't have astronomical data. I'm going to keep saying that. Like, that seems crazy, but that's how it was done. So why is he writing down longitude and latitude? And most importantly, is it real? Is this a real book? Well, it's a notorious parenthetic style of writing, meaning continually being suspended partway and interruptions and digressions completely later, repetition. If you're not prepared for Ptolemy's fondness for suspension and resumption, you might think that you're being led to its subjective text by extensive interpolations, or that Ptolemy didn't know his own mind, or that they mashed together a bunch of bullshit and called it this book. Anyway, is it real? In my opinion, as a legendary sage said, negative Ghost Rider. Is it real? No, full of shit. This is a whole 100% horse shit manufactured. Right? This is nonsense. Alan, this is the Ghost Rider for you. And this one also was a Ghost Rider, but I fucked it up.
Sorry, my mic was muted. I laughed really hard when you said that.
Nice. Negative Ghost Rider is my answer to is it real? Yeah. So here we go, right? This is like page 1. This is the terrestrial and celestial spheres. And it says, Ptolemy assumes that the reader understands and accepts the two-sphere model of the cosmos. That is, that there is a terrestrial and celestial spheres that are inextricably linked. And that, whoa, isn't it crazy that Ptolemy gave the definition of the celestial sphere from Wikipedia? That's weird. It's probably nothing. The stars are thought of as fixed to the surface of the outer sphere. Oh, man, we just went over that. Anyway, if we read on a little bit, he assumes that the horizon divides the celestial sphere into 2 equal parts. He's already going back with his hardcore bisecting Great Meridian, right, to assume all these things and start making his geographic coordinates. Of course, he has to make a spherical coordinate system, which is how he started this, right? He had to know all of that to do this, which in 200 BC is questionable, but Wikipedia says he did it, so that's what we got. And he assumes that everyone is in the intermediate northern latitude so that he can make things, like the latitude is equal to Polaris elevation angle and other assumptions that simplify his calculations. But for the ancient geographers, geographical directions were always determined astronomically. Essentially, where's north? I don't know. Where's the North Star? Boom. That's as simple as it was. That's all they had. That's all it was. That's all that means. So everything in basis that we have was determined astronomically. Always has been. This has been my position so far. So far, pretty good evidence. Astrolabe,
We got the armillary sphere. We got the Ptolemy, the father of all geography, has actually said, well, the terrestrial and celestial sphere must be combined. It is like if you're a heretic, if you don't understand it. Here's his explanation of longitude, latitude, which we also went over at the beginning. And he's defining a parallel of latitude. Now, this is a little bit different. There's a circle on the terrestrial sphere parallel to the equator, meaning that he can have an equal altitude angle, right? So anyone on that latitude has the same elevation angle. That's what he's talking about here. Kind of clever if it was real and if he did that. Another thing, he's seemed to be accessing Wikipedia, or Wikipedia is accessing Ptolemy. One of these things is true, but here's a picture from his graticule, as Ptolemy came up with a graticule way back when. Interesting. Of his second projection, which looks a lot like this projection and looks a lot like this projection, but is different. Don't worry. And he invented these, 3,000 years before these, so don't worry. These are different. And this one shows the resulting graticule, which is a pseudo-conical projection. It just means that there's a variation on the other map projections. As we know, we have many map projections. If you go to the database page, there's several there, and what he had was a pseudo-conical, and we'll see, boy, that's not even a big deal. You got tangent, you got conical, you got pseudo-cylindrical, you got pseudo-conical, you got pseudo-cylindrical, you got pseudo-azimuthal, you got regular, you got partial ones, you have ones that take polyhedral things, retro-azimuthal, doesn't matter. There's all sorts of projections of the celestial sphere onto the plane, and that is what all of these represent. When you're looking at these distortions from the tesseract matrix, these aren't distortions of how the globe Earth is distorted on a plane map. It's distortions of how the celestial sphere is portrayed on the planisphere, right? So the astrolabe did a better job than the globe Earth. But if we move on, in Ptolemy's book, oh look, Ptolemy had an armillary sphere. Guys, look at that. Isn't that crazy? Who'd have thunk it? And he didn't have an astrolabe. Nope, he's a big boy. He had the armillary sphere because Earth is a globe, and he knew it, right? That was the whole thing. I don't know if I buy that, but if we look at his book on what he did have, literal chapters and chapters and chapters and columns and pages of geographic long lat angles measurements. Crazy. Let's look at some. Like, the whole book was this. It's just lists of towns, places, points of interest, and his version of long lat to help the lads in the future who were going to come down with the long lat later. He knew that you'd be able to convert his long lat to our long lat, but I wonder how that would happen, though. I wonder how you would convert his measurement to our measurement. And we're still going, by the way. We're still in, this is like the third chapter of straight up GPS long lats. And the book father of geography and the father of the terrestrial and celestial spheres, Ptolemy. So, interesting trick, right, is how do they use longitude? Well, equal to 5 on the parallel road. So they had a ratio of a great circle, and they used this quaternary measurement to break down measurements. So they knew that 40,000 stadia of latitude to 72,000 stadia of longitude. So they use this, and then you can say to convert it. So they used a ratio of this to do longitude, which, again, this whole thing is fake. But this is the story of how they had longitude before they had longitude, because it was in stadia. If you do the math here, right, you can just say that, oh, well, this is the whole measurement. You can just do the 360 ratio. You can get your conversion factor. You can say, well, stadia measurements are just in degrees, and then degrees equals stadia because I've defined a metric and a straight up equivalence. And then you can all day long convert degrees to long lat stadia, and it makes no difference. So it's like, wait a second. So someone could have invented a fake metric of stadia, converted modern measurements and coordinates to this fake metric, and mathematically, no one could tell. Is that what I'm saying? 100%. That's what I'm saying, and that's what I'm saying happened. Now, real quick, all of these fake Greeks and their history on Wikipedia are backed up by other fake Greeks, and in particular, a dude called Herodotus, who I actually read about a lot in my college class. I read about that his style is crazy, right? Myth and legend gets mixed. That is what I remember of reading the so-called histories in classics, is that it's myth, legend, and history all mixed in one. Who can tell if that was a god or a hit? Like that's the history, right? Homer, the Odyssey, the Iliad, the Battle of all of these are stowed in myth and legend. But if you this is the father of history. That's his name and title.
He wrote in myths and storytelling about gods and legends, but he's the father of history. Just pointing that out because this is the guy that backs up Eratosthenes, Hipparchus, and all the other fake Greeks that we were mentioning. However, I wonder what shape Herodotus thought the Earth was. Just kind of a fun fact. Seems that through all his histories and all the ways that he described things on his word of mouth and oratory transcriptions, he always described the Earth with edges and at the end of the world, and considered Earth to be a flat dish with defined edges, and literally inferred that the sun was an east, and if you didn't, that you were a retard. Little quote, but that is what he said, right? Strongly held a flat Earth view. In fact, he made a map, and it looks a lot like this map. It looks a lot like an azimuthal equidistant North Polar projection on everything that he knew. But who's to say? Just to say that Hipparchus, the dude who backs up all the fake Greeks, actually knew that Earth wasn't a sphere, and he was definitely a flat earther by every historical record, and there's copious amounts of them because he is the historical record and he writes all the other ones, and they're filled with his flat earth mannerisms. Now, all of that to say, at the end of the day, what do we get from this? Well, we get a geographic graticule that is a carbon copy of the celestial sphere. Literally, this is a 1-for-1 copy. You can go on a map, but are you really on a map, or are you on a celestial sphere? Or are you on a terrestrial sphere? Or are you on none of these things because all of them are made up based on math and coordinate systems? That's a trick question. The answer is the last one. So essentially, when we're looking at stars over flat Earth and right ascension declination, declination will be the angle of the latitude that this appears to the observer, and then right ascension will be the time, right? We need the time component for when it appears at a ground position. It'll never change latitude, but it will rotate around the Earth and change at a ground position. So the final piece will be combining all this into, I think, a script. We're going to take an observation from Stellarium. We're going to plug in the azimuth and the altitude. That's it. And the program will show you where you are on the globe, geographic graticule, because that's how inextricably linked they are. I can tell you based on a star where we are. Now, that wouldn't be possible unless everything I'm saying is true.
Now, there's an inextricable link between the stars and the map, right? I call it between the celestial sphere and the geographic graticule, because latitude and longitude are inextricably linked to the sky and the stars and the time and sidereal time, right? You could look at a star, you could take an azimuth, meaning directions, 0 being north, and you take a 360-degree reading from there, and that's your azimuth, and then an elevation angle, which is just its angle of incidence above the horizon. If you take just an azimuth and elevation angle of any star, then we can tell you where you are on the graticule. So I put it into where I'm at, about, let's see, Massachusetts. Here, let's try here. Yeah, Massachusetts. And I'm going to look up. I'm going to find this star. I'm going to run my program on this altitude and elevation. So this is in, right ascension and declination, but let's convert that. Let's do quickly the program here. So we'll give it a run, and we'll say it's at 45-ish azimuth, and it's at 54-ish degrees. And today is at 9/24, so 2024. Was it months of 9/22, and it's 2/13, 14/13. Now that gives us a plot of the ground position of the star that I just saw. So what that is giving us is this, right? So what it has just by an azimuth and an elevation of a star, when I look a little bit north, so here it is, and it gives you the ground position on the graticule of where that star is. Now, the time is necessary because you will have to know when it's going to be over a certain point, like when that ground position is going to rotate depending on its latitude around the circle. Essentially, this dot is going to rotate around here depending on the time is when it's going to stop over here. So this is where I saw it. This is what the ground position is. This is where it is relative to me as I'm over here. And this is why there's such a link between the sky and the map, right? There's no one measuring the ground, mind you. We're just finding our position relative to the stars. And this, I think, should prove it. Right? As we just showed, at any point, one of these stars will give you the exact location where you are on the Earth. It doesn't have to be right ascension declination. There's a direct conversion happening for right ascension declination to long lat, right? So here's what it looks like on the AE map. Imagine the continents are here, right? If I drew them in here, then this would just rotate around and you would have the time when you would see the star. So here it is. right? And then here would be it moving. So just imagine, this is why the time is necessary. None of these stars ever change latitude. If a star appears at this latitude, it will appear at this latitude for everyone. The only thing that will change is the time, and the time gives you the position of the ground position of the star, which is why right eccentric declination and right angle hour eccentric conversion are necessary, right? The stars are everything. The stars are the backbone of longitude, latitude, backbone of the grid. They're the backbone of everything. If we use the stars to measure the stars and then compare them to the stars, it's always going to come up stars, right?
Comes up stars, guys.
This is essentially why it's important. This is what they've mapped out. All they've done is look at the sky, take a good map of it, and then they've given us the corresponding points on the ground. Now, because the sky is in a dome shape, we see it in a hemisphere. When you match the ground to it, what shape does that force the ground into? Of course, it would necessitate sphericity. So that's where, in my opinion, all sphericity comes from. Well, and that's pretty much it. That's the whole thing. Hour and a half, hour and 40 minutes.